Right. So as the Portuguese began to explore that west coast of Africa, they also began to establish trading posts, and that was their main motive. And so over 50 Portuguese trading posts are going to be established from the west coast of Africa all the way across to East Asia. And when the Portuguese first arrived in the Indian Ocean basin, initially they tried to force their will within the zones of Indian Ocean trade. In fact, Alfonso de Albuquerque was a Portuguese commander in charge of the Indian Ocean, and they tried to seize power and they tried to force merchant ships to buy these safe conduct passes. And if a ship was caught without one of these passes, they might be executed for it or might have their hands cut off. And so the Portuguese initially tried to use force within that system, but ultimately it didn't work very well. And most of the Arab and Indian and Southeast Asian merchants continued to trade without buying these safe conduct passes. And then the English and Dutch began to arrive. And the English and Dutch are going to create better ships than what the Portuguese had. And they're going to find that it was much easier to work within the existing trade network. Instead of trying to use force, trying to incorporate themselves within the existing trade networks. And so that's what they did. They too created trading posts or took over some of the Portuguese trading posts as well. And especially with the British and Dutch, we're going to see the importance of these joint stock companies. And so the idea of these joint stock companies was groups of investors would put their money together to create these large companies. And the idea was that it would help share both the risk and the rewards that came with trade. For example, if I just owned a single ship and that single ship was lost due to a disaster at sea, or if it was raided, I just lost all of my profits. But if we put our money together and we create this larger company where we can buy 100 ships and kind of spread our risk out, and then also split the rewards amongst all of the members of this company. And so that was the idea behind these joint stock companies. It was to help kind of share both the risk and the rewards of this large scale trade. And both the British and the Dutch government supported these joint stock companies. They had quite a bit of power. They could make war on locals if it was in the best interest of the company. And so these companies became extremely profitable and gained quite a bit of power in the Indian Ocean. We're also going to see the rise of insurance companies as well. Companies arose to insure these ventures. And so a couple of the more important large joint stock companies are going to be the British East India Company, which they're going to come to dominate a lot of the trade out of India, and the Dutch VOC, or the Dutch East India Company. And they're going to focus mostly on the Spice Islands of Southeast Asia. So we look at the Europeans in the Indian Ocean basin. Again, the Portuguese were the first to arrive. And as the Europeans arrived, they found that they really weren't able to force their will on these larger Asian states that already had well-established governments. So the Muslim empires, India and China, they weren't really able to force their will on those regions. And so instead, they began to establish trading ports. And the Portuguese began to establish these trading posts and along the coast of India. They even conquered Sri Lanka and brought that under their control. They introduced Catholic missionaries to the Indian Ocean as well. They then take over part of Southeast Asia. They seize the port of Malacca. And this is important for trade, especially trade coming out of the Spice Islands. Now, there were a couple of exceptions when it came to European dominance. And one of those exceptions was the Philippines. And so the Philippines are going to come under the control of Spain. And they're going to name the Philippines after the Spanish king, Philip II. And Manila is going to become kind of the new Spanish capital in the Philippines. And it becomes extremely important to their East Asian trade. And so as Spain also came to control a lot of territory in the Americas, tons of silver is going to flood from the Americas on the famous Manila galleons of the Spanish all the way to the Philippines. And then that American silver would be traded for East Asian luxuries. The Spanish were also very active when it came to spreading Christianity. And they're going to force prominent Filipinos to convert to Catholicism. And they were actually quite successful. And by the 19th century, the Philippines were one of the most fervent Roman Catholic lands in all of the world. Another territory that's going to come under European control is the Spice Islands of Southeast Asia. And so initially the Portuguese take over a lot of this territory, but when the Dutch arrive, they're going to force the Portuguese out, and they're going to come to control a lot of these Spice Islands. And then in India, most of India was under the control of the Mughal dynasty at this time. But the Mughal dynasty was beginning to decline, and they were pretty much content to allow Europeans to come to dominate long-distance trade. And so at first, the Portuguese established trading posts in India, and then the British arrive, and the British East India Company are going to begin to play a bigger and bigger role in trade out of India. And so with this expansion of exploration also came an increase in commercial rivalries. This was competition between European powers for these trade markets. And so the Dutch are going to come into conflict with the Portuguese over the Spice Islands in Southeast Asia. The English and French are going to come into conflict over India. Both wanted the cotton and tea exports out of India. And so this conflict between the British and French over India is going to spill over into one of the larger of these conflicts, which was the 7 Years' War. So the 7 Years' War is really, in a lot of ways, one of the first global wars. And it spread into many parts of the globe. In Europe, the British and Prussia are going to join together to fight against France, Austria, and Russia. And Prussia does a pretty good job of kind of containing those forces. In India, fighting's going to continue between the British and the French for control of India. And they're going to use local Indian armies as allies in their struggle. In the Caribbean, the Spanish and French come together to try to limit the British expansion in the Caribbean. And in North America, the French and Indian War, which started as a conflict between the French and the Native Americans against the British for territory in the Ohio Valley, it's going to kind of spill over and become part of this larger 7 Years' War as well. And the outcome of the 7 Years' War is that Britain wins. And as a result, Britain's going to gain control of India. They're going to gain a lot of French territory in North America, including modern-day Canada and Florida. The Dutch are going to maintain control of the Spice Islands. And this really paves the way for British dominance in the next era. All right, so as we look at our colonies here, you can see Britain is going to come to control in North America, first just the eastern coast of North America, but then after the 7 Years' War, they're going to control most of modern-day United States and Canada. Most of what we call Latin America, Mexico, Central and South America, is going to be under the control of Spain. However, under the Treaty of Tordesillas, it's going to create a dividing line here that's going to grant most of modern-day Brazil to Portugal. Portugal is also going to set up trading posts all along the coast of Africa here. Britain is going to come to dominate trade out of India. However, India remained under the control of the declining Mughal Empire at this time. The Dutch are going to come to control the Spice Islands of Southeast Asia here, and then Spain would also come to control the Philippines, which are going to give them access to trade with East Asia.